By now, you know a wave of red washed over the country and the state. In Washington, the GOP took 7 seats in the Senate, one more than what was needed to regain control of that chamber. And here in Missouri, the Republicans will now have a veto-proof majority. The impressions you guys had of last night's results?
Well, like we were talking about earlier and before the show came on, is that I think the winners of all of this are the pundits, the pollsters, and the people who put up the money. It's what the pollsters pretty much said it was going to be. They called it for the Republicans. It went the Republicans' way, both in state races as well as nationally. And I think what could be lost in this is that we could have more of the same kind of government that we've had the last 6 years. Even though you have the winners saying, no, we have policies, we have plans, we're going to legislate. But I don't think they have a clear enough majority, especially on the national level, to break up this sort of deadlock that's been going on in Washington.
Well, and there was one other winner there. Those were the local television stations. They made boatloads of money off of all the political advertising. Even in states like Missouri, where there weren't any big statewide races going on, a lot of money got spent. And one of the reasons, if you look at some of the analysis back in 2012, during that presidential election, something like 4 out of every $5 spent in campaigning was spent on local TV. It was 95% this time around. So the local stations made out like bandits by being able to sell all that advertising. Now, it's funny because as we were talking before the show, a lot of folks couldn't wait for those commercials to be over with. Mitch McConnell, in his live address when he was claiming victory last night, even said, "I know you'll all be happy that there won't be any more commercials." So maybe they were winners, the TV stations were winners in the short run, but how much more of this can we stand?
Yeah, I guess the thing that really bothered me was that we didn't see much of it here in Missouri, but in other states like Florida and Illinois and Colorado and others. I mean, just the level of fear and hatred on some of these commercials were just incredible. I mean, if you weren't fearful of someone taking your gun, you were fearful of someone who's not going to allow you to have a gun, or just name an issue. And that's all you saw over and over and over again. But I think the one thing that people really realized that toward the end was that this was all about the president. Every commercial that came out, if it was on the Democratic side, you didn't hear about the president, even though he's the leader of the Democratic Party. On the Republican side, that's all you heard about was Republican. Didn't matter whether you were running for dog catcher or for senator. Obama was linked to every one of those commercials.
Well, and even here in mid-Missouri, we would see that in commercials in the 47th district race in the state house, that our state legislature didn't really have a whole lot to do. In fact, went out of its way not to have anything to do with the Affordable Care Act or Obama's policies in that realm. Yet that was still cornerstone in one of Chuck Basie's commercials against John Wright.
And I do think it's true. I mean, they wouldn't spend the money if on average, those kinds of commercials don't work. But it doesn't always work. I mean, look at that judgeship down in Jefferson City, the circuit judge position. Republican groups spent, I think, $400,000 on that campaign. Most of that on TV. Race. Those crazy psychedelic ads. Yes. And it didn't work. She won re-election. So it doesn't always play out the way they think it's going to.
The one thing that I'm going to be interested in now that we've sort of gone past the midterms and now we're going to start talking about the 2016 presidential election.
Yes, because that campaign started about an hour ago.
Yeah, about an hour ago. And now I'm really going to be interested to see how much money is going to be spent, and is that money going to be spent in television ads? Yes, it's going to happen. I think the numbers that Mike gave are going to go up. But I'm also going to be interested in seeing how much of that's going to be spent in social media, how much of that is going to be spent on grassroots, on the ground campaigns, which is what the Obama campaigns, both in 2008 and 2012, are known for. So it's going to be interesting to see where all this money, which is now flowing in because of the Supreme Court decision, where is that going to go on a nationwide scale?
One thing I was happy about in watching the television coverage, and I tended to watch mostly CNN and Fox just to kind of see how they compare them. not a lot of the gee whiz stuff anymore. I mean, there was a lot of in-your-face graphics, but it was
mostly...
There was
a virtual Senate thing on CNN.
What I really liked, and he's been getting better and more airtime as John King at CNN, that guy knows every single precinct in every single state and can sit there and predict very accurately what's going to be happening in those contests. And for somebody who's a political junkie, at least, that was really interesting.
I mean, but that goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, the pollsters, they have really fine-tuned elections. I mean, they pretty much know weeks ahead of the election what's going to happen because they have an idea of what the turnout is going to be.
And their research is so good based on what they've been able to do there. Well, there were thousands of hours of live television coverage produced last night, and there were bound to be some bloopers along the way. Maybe you caught this one on MSNBC.
We were just talking here off the air about a lot of this is all about 2016, about how they get to the White House the next time. That's the big prize in Washington. And there have been a lot of Republican senators who have hoped that Mitch McConnell will... Could that be me?
No, it's not you. It's something ambient.
No, I'm afraid it is, unfortunately. The alarm goes off, and there you are.
I thought you were a fire. Yeah.
Yes, I will remember to bring home the milk and right. And don't worry about it, and I'll feed the dog in the morning. Just sleep in. It's going to be okay. I'm sorry about that.
So, Ernest, as the show open was rolling today, as we were getting ready to do the show, I saw you reach into your pocket, turn off your phone. Apparently, you're one step ahead of Tom Brokaw.
Yes.
What else were you watching last night? Mike, you said you had spent most of your time watching CNN, Fox. What stood out to you aside from John King's institutional knowledge?
They were trying desperately to find a surprising storyline because, as we were saying, a lot of it was predicted. And so at times they were hanging it on fairly thin reeds. But, you know, that Senate race in Virginia was really surprisingly close, for example. The Florida governor's race, I think that was surprisingly close. And there were some other contests that weren't, apparent until later in the evening. And so they tried really every time, CNN makes a projection and these huge graphics would fly out at you in the same way with Fox. So I don't know that they did the best they could, knowing what the basic storyline was likely to be.
I mean, it's hard for the news networks to keep the viewer's attention in a midterm election because a lot of it is so local and it's sort of based on in a certain state or a certain region, and people are just going to go off and watch something else that's on TV. I mean, most of what you saw last night, with the exception of say The Voice or some of those other shows, were reruns in anticipation that people are going to be watching the elections. Well, no, they just turned to another cable outlet and we're watching that. I mean, that's mainly what was going on.
Now, what I didn't see, and I didn't expect to see it on the national cable outlets, for that matter, I didn't expect to see it much in election night returns coverage on the local stations, but I really want to see a lot more coverage of what happened around the country in states and in localities. I mean, we had several constitutional amendments in Missouri. We know, most of us who cared know how they turned out, but do we know why they turned out that way? Do we know what was going on around the rest of the country? Yeah, there was some sort of sexy issues like marijuana laws or abortion restrictions or minimum wage or something like that. But there's a lot of other stuff that's probably not as sexy, but things like in Missouri restricting the governor and what he can do with withholding, or
the teacher tenure
thing, or allowing prosecutors to bring in prior conviction information in sexual assault cases.
Exactly.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff, and some of it, was kind of contradictory. I mean, here in Columbia, we've also had the taxpayers turning down money for cops and firefighters, but at the same time, we had this law and order yes vote around the state. So these things are not easy to explain, but somebody should try to explain them.
Is that maybe the media not doing the job ahead of time to explain and go deeper into the language? I know that as somebody who isn't necessarily a legal expert, I know I spend a lot of time on my own researching, and the way a ballot measure may be written and put on the ballot may not say what it's actually going to do, so that there's room for a lot of confusion if there isn't good education prior to Election Day.
I do think that the media does have some responsibility there, or their lack of responsibility in doing that sort of makes this a problem that, and Mike has described it very well. Yeah. And I think part of it also is that the fact that with these elections, you have candidates, which create a narrative, and that's easier for journalists to cover that as opposed to some of the murky, not so not so visually pleasing
Yeah.
issues of teacher tenure or whether or not you're going to vote on an amendment that's going to, or not amendment, but a proposition that's going to increase your taxes or something like that. You know,
I mean, I will say I was able to find good quality local media stories about some of those initiatives we were talking about, but I still want to have some explanation as to why things turned out the way they did and
you
what
should
that's
have that
going to
on
mean
election
going
night.
forward. And that kind of preparation could have been there.
Or that's
but
the
it certainly
story that
needs to
gets
be
done
there
today
day two, day
for
3.
tomorrow.
Yeah.